There I was, standing on my driveway with the morning sun hitting the polished chrome of my brand new Rolls-Royce. The engine had just cooled down, and I was admiring the smooth, silent finish on the hood when I heard it, a loud gasp from across the street. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. That high-pitched, judgment-loaded tone? It could only be one person. Karen. Within seconds, she was marching across her lawn in a fury. Pajamas, slippers, hair up in a messy bun, phone already recording. "What is that doing here?" she yelled, waving her phone in the air like it was some kind of HOA-issued badge. I stayed calm. I'd dealt with her before. She'd filed complaints over my grass being too green, my holiday lights being too bright, and once accused my garden gnome of lowering neighborhood values. I said nothing. I just gave her a nod and looked back at the car. That made it worse. "You can't just park that kind of car here," she shouted. "This is a quiet neighborhood. We have standards. Rules. This isn't Beverly Hills." I almost laughed, but I kept my face straight. "It's my driveway, Karen." Wrong answer. She looked at me like I had just committed a federal offense. "Not for long," she muttered. She whipped out her phone, now tapping with exaggerated anger. "I'm calling the HOA. No, I'm calling the police. That car's probably stolen anyway." I blinked. "You're calling the cops because I parked my own car on my own driveway?" She didn't even look up. "You think you can show off around here? Not on my watch." That's when I knew she wasn't just annoyed. She was angry because the car didn't fit her idea of what belonged here. And more importantly, I didn't fit her idea either. She'd always treated me like I was some outsider who didn't deserve to live in her neighborhood. But this hit her pride hard. I thought it would stop there. I figured she'd storm back inside and hype up one of her usual HOA complaints. But I underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go to make a point. About 10 minutes later, a sheriff's car pulled up in front of my house. Now, I've seen police in the area before, traffic stops, the occasional call about noise. But seeing those lights flash just as I was pouring myself a glass of iced tea? That was something new. The officers got out, calm and collected. Karen came flying out of her house, arms waving, practically running toward them. "That's him," she shouted. "That's the guy. The car's stolen. I told you." The officers looked confused. One turned to her and asked, "Ma'am, do you have proof of this?" Karen started rambling. "No one like him could afford a car like that. He doesn't belong here. Ask for his papers. Arrest him." She was shaking, flustered, like she believed her own nonsense. The officers turned to me. One of them asked politely, "Sir, can we speak with you?" "Of course," I said. I handed over the registration, my license, everything they needed. I even showed them the finance receipt, full payment, in my name. They looked through it carefully. Everything checked out. Karen stood to the side, fuming. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't angry about a crime. She was angry that I could afford a Rolls-Royce and that she couldn't stop it. And then came the moment I didn't expect. One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." I blinked. "What?" Karen practically screamed in victory. "Yes. Finally. Thank you." The officer said nothing else. Just nodded toward me. "Please place your hands behind your back." The next thing I knew, I felt the cold click of handcuffs on my wrists. Everything went quiet. Karen stood frozen. I could feel the eyes of a few neighbors watching from behind blinds. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just stood there as the officers walked me slowly toward the street. Karen was filming now, narrating like a news anchor. There you have it, folks. Caught red-handed. They always slip up. I knew it. But I had a strange feeling this wasn't going to play out the way she thought. Because the look the officer gave me, just before we reached the squad car, said something entirely different. The officer didn't say a word as we walked, just held my arm lightly and guided me down the driveway like we were in some slow-motion parade. Karen was trailing behind, practically bouncing with excitement, recording every step. "Finally! They're cleaning up this neighborhood," she kept saying. I could hear her fake gasps and dramatic narrating, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. I glanced at the neighbors' windows. Some curtains twitched. A few faces peeked through. Everyone was watching. Nobody stepped out. Not yet, anyway. They were waiting to see how it played out, and I didn't blame them. It's not every day someone in a three-piece suit gets hauled off next to a $500,000 car. When we reached the squad car, the second officer opened the back door, but didn't make me get in. He looked at his partner, then looked at me. Karen was still running her mouth behind us, voice shrill. Take him in. Check his record. That car's probably fake too. The officer finally turned around and asked her to step back. Ma'am, we're handling it. She didn't like that. You don't know who he is. He's probably a scammer. That car doesn't belong here. At that point, something changed in the officer's tone. Still calm, but sharper. Ma'am, please return to your property. Karen froze for a second. Excuse me? You're interfering with an investigation, he said. Go back inside. She scoffed like she couldn't believe her ears. You're protecting him? The officer ignored her. He turned to me and, with his voice lower now, said, We know you're not under arrest. I raised an eyebrow. So, what is this? He leaned in slightly. You've got every right to park your vehicle. This is just procedural theater. Procedural theater? I repeated. Let's just say we're teaching her a little lesson, he said with a tiny smirk. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I trusted the tone. He wasn't mocking me. He was handling the situation in a way I hadn't expected, smart, calm, and oddly satisfying. I looked over at Karen, who had backed up a few steps but was still filming. The first officer pulled out my ID again and pretended to double-check it. He looked over at Karen and said, loud enough for her to hear, Mr. Daniels, you've been a resident of this neighborhood for how long? I played along. 6 years. And you own the property? Yes, sir. Paid off. And the vehicle? That Rolls-Royce. I nodded. Registered and insured in my name. Want to see the title? He smiled. Already did. Everything's clean. Then he turned back toward Karen. Ma'am, you made some serious accusations. Falsely reporting a crime is not something we take lightly. Karen's face dropped. She lowered her phone a little. What? I didn't taste. I was concerned. Concern is fine, the officer replied. But when you accuse someone of stealing a vehicle just because you don't like the way it looks in your neighborhood, that's something else. You don't understand, she said, trying to backtrack. He doesn't belong. I mean that car, it's too much for this street. The second officer turned toward her now, crossing his arms. Ma'am, there's no law against success. Karen looked like someone had slapped her with words. She opened her mouth but nothing came out. She stood there blinking like she didn't know what to say for the first time in her life. The handcuffs were still around my wrists, but I barely noticed anymore. The real weight was off my shoulders now. That's when something unexpected happened. A neighbor stepped out. Mr. Langley from 3 houses down. Retired, quiet, always reading on his porch. He raised his voice just enough. I saw everything. She walked onto his property. Started yelling before the car even stopped running. Karen spun around. You're taking his side? Langley just shook his head. No sides. Just tired of watching you harass people. A second neighbor came out. Then a third. Slowly, one by one, doors opened and voices joined in. I heard her shouting from inside my house. She did the same thing when my niece visited. She's always been like this. Karen's eyes darted around like the walls were closing in. For the first time since the day began, she didn't have an audience. She had witnesses. If you're enjoying this wild ride, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because this ranch drama's just heating up. I stood there, still in handcuffs, as more neighbors came out onto their porches like it was a town hall meeting happening in real time. Karen's face turned from red to pale to something between panic and disbelief. Her phone was still in her hand, but she had stopped recording. She was spinning in place, trying to figure out if anyone would come to her defense. No one did. One woman from 2 doors down stepped forward. Karen, you've done this before. You called security on my son because he had a skateboard. You left anonymous notes in my mailbox about my lawn. And now this? Over a car. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. You could hear years of bottled-up frustration in every word. Karen tried to reply, but the woman cut her off. You don't get to play victim this time. The officers still hadn't taken the cuffs off, and I wasn't in a rush to ask. I just stood quietly, listening. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about something bigger, the tension that had been building in this neighborhood for years. Karen had just lit the match. One of the men from across the cul-de-sac spoke next. You called the cops over a car, Karen? Car. That man worked hard for what he has, and you couldn't stand it. That's not an HOA problem. That's a you problem. A few heads nodded. Someone mumbled, amen to that. Karen finally raised her voice again, but it wasn't confident anymore. I was just following the rules. We have standards in this neighborhood. I care about property values. The second officer raised an eyebrow. Property values? Ma'am, falsely accusing someone of grand theft auto and wasting police resources doesn't exactly increase property values. The words landed like a slap. Then the first officer finally turned to me. Mr. Daniels, you good if we take these off now? I nodded. Sure thing. Though I gotta admit, I was curious to see how far this act was going to go. He chuckled as he unlocked the cuffs. Long enough for the truth to come out. As I rubbed my wrists, Karen tried to regain control. This is ridiculous. You're all turning against me for what? For asking questions? For caring about this neighborhood? Another neighbor, a younger guy who just moved in a few months ago, spoke up. No, Karen. We're turning against how you treat people. You've been playing cop, judge, and executioner since the day I moved in. Karen stood there frozen, blinking. For once, there was no HOA bylaw she could quote, no vague threat she could throw. She had crossed a line, and now everyone knew it. Then something unexpected happened. One of the kids, maybe 12 years old, came out with a small poster in his hands. I couldn't read what was on it at first, but he held it up in front of everyone. Mr. D has the coolest car. Be nice, Karen. People chuckled. The mood lightened, but the point still hit hard. Karen didn't say another word. She turned around slowly, stormed back across the street, and slammed her door shut. The echo of that door was louder than anything she'd shouted that morning. The officers stayed a little while longer, chatting casually with the neighbors. One of them turned to me and said, "That's one way to handle a false report." Public opinion sure flipped fast. I smiled. Sometimes you don't need to shout. Just let the truth stand long enough. Before they left, the officer handed me a small card. File a report if you want. She wasted our time, made false claims. You've got witnesses. I looked at the card, then at the crowd around me. Everyone was still standing close, like they were waiting to see what I'd do next. I tucked the card in my pocket. Maybe later. For now, I think we all just needed to see this happen. Someone clapped. Then another. It wasn't loud or over the top. Just a slow, satisfied applause from a group of people who'd finally seen justice. Not the legal kind, but the neighborhood kind. The kind that's been long overdue. The Rolls-Royce still sat in the driveway, gleaming like nothing ever happened. But everything had changed. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. It was quieter, but not the usual kind of quiet. It was the kind that follows a storm. You could tell people were still thinking about what had happened. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, half expecting to see Karen pacing on her lawn again. But her front curtains were drawn tight. No movement. No dramatic phone calls. No HOA clipboard in sight. Across the street, one of the neighbors I barely knew waved at me for the first time. I raised my mug and nodded back. A small moment, but it felt big. People who used to just nod in passing were now walking slower by my place, stopping to say hello, asking how I was doing. Funny how one Karen meltdown brought out the human side of everyone else. Later that afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a folded note with no name on it. Just a handwritten line that said, asterisk, about time someone stood up to her. Asterisk, no signature. Just that. Simple and honest. It made me smile. Not because it was praise, but because it meant someone else had felt the same pressure, the same annoyance, but never had the chance to push back. That evening, I decided to take the Rolls out for a short drive through the neighborhood. Not to show off, not to make a statement. I just wanted to enjoy it. Windows down, music low, sunset cutting across the dashboard. But as I turned the first corner, I noticed something strange. Karen's house had a "for sale" sign on the lawn. It hadn't been there that morning. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank. Someone having fun. But the sign was real. Professional. Freshly planted. My foot eased off the gas. I stared for a second, then drove on. No need to stop. I had a feeling I'd learn more soon enough. Sure enough, the next day, the whispers started. At the local coffee spot, at the HOA meeting bulletin board, even on the neighborhood Facebook group. People were talking. Apparently, Karen was taking time off and planning to relocate. A few claimed she was pushed out quietly. Others said she had finally gotten tired of being the villain. Some even said she got a warning from the HOA board after receiving multiple formal complaints, not from me, but from everyone else. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. All I knew was that things were changing. You could feel it. About a week after the handcuff incident, the HOA sent out a notice for an open discussion forum to hear resident concerns. That was new. Normally, their meetings were closed off, just minutes sent out with no real say for regular folks. But this one invited everyone. I showed up out of curiosity. The room was packed. People actually showed up, not just to listen but to speak. One after another, they shared things Karen had done over the years. The sneaky photos. The fake complaints. The passive-aggressive warnings left on doors. One man even said she once called animal control because his dog looked too large. By the end of the meeting, the mood had completely flipped. The board, which usually sat cold and distant, actually looked embarrassed. They said they'd review new rules for member conduct, and that repeated false reports could now lead to fines and possible removal from board participation. That got a round of quiet applause. After the meeting, a couple approached me. Retired couple, lived 3 houses down. They said they'd been too afraid to speak up before. She always made us feel watched, the woman said. Her husband added, but when they put those cuffs on you and you stayed calm, that told us it was okay to stop being quiet. That hit me. I hadn't tried to start anything. I didn't want drama. But sometimes, the one moment you handle with calm strength becomes the moment others find their own courage. That weekend, I got an idea. Nothing big. Just a cookout. A few burgers, some music, lawn chairs near the garage. No formal invites, just a sign near the mailbox that said, "Neighborhood cookout, all are welcome. Bring a chair." I didn't expect much. But what happened next showed me something bigger was already starting. Saturday rolled around quicker than I expected. I set up a few folding tables near the driveway, rolled the grill out from the garage, and pulled a cooler full of soda and water to the side. I didn't go all out. Just some burgers, hot dogs, chips, and a Bluetooth speaker looping old country tunes. Nothing fancy. No RSVP list. Just something simple and open. Something real. Around 4 p.m., I was flipping the first batch of burgers when I heard a soft, "Hey there," behind me. I turned to see Becky, the woman who lived at the corner lot, holding a bowl of pasta salad and smiling nervously. "Hope I'm not early," she said. Wasn't sure if it was actually happening. I smiled and pointed to the table. "You're right on time. Put it wherever." A few minutes later, 2 teenagers on bikes rolled up. One of them was dragging a bag of ice behind his tire. "Mom said you might need this," he said, dropping it next to the cooler. "She's on her way too." Before I knew it, the quiet little cookout had turned into something else. Cars started parking along the curb. Folding chairs popped up everywhere. Someone brought a portable speaker and hooked up a playlist. Someone else dragged out a cornhole set. A couple of dads from down the street pulled up with a tray of ribs and a homemade peach cobbler. Within the hour, my driveway had turned into a full-blown block party. The energy was easy, warm, unforced. Kids were running in the grass, chasing bubbles. Adults were laughing, not just talking weather and small talk, but actually connecting. The kind of connection that had been missing for a long time in this place. And not once did anyone mention Karen. Not once did anyone bring up the HOA or the complaints or the squad car from last week. Instead, people shared stories. One guy talked about his dog who always barked at the mailman. A young couple chatted about how hard it was to make friends since moving in. Someone else mentioned a neighbor who used to throw barbecues like this 10 years ago, before the neighborhood got too serious. I stood by the grill, flipping burgers, listening to everyone talk like we'd all known each other for years. I looked out over the pond behind my backyard. The sunset was just starting to catch the water. Golden, peaceful. And in the middle of all that laughter and music, I had a moment of quiet. Not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel when everything just fits. That's when George walked up. He's the guy who always wore suspenders and never smiled much. He held out a plate and said, "Didn't think I'd ever see something like this again." "Like what?" I asked. He nodded at the crowd. Neighbors acting like neighbors. Then he said something that stuck with me. "You know, you didn't just park a fancy car in your driveway. You parked a reason for all this to finally happen." I didn't have an answer for that. Just handed him a burger and smiled. As the sky got darker, someone lit a few sparklers. The kids squealed. A speaker played some Johnny Cash. And I watched as the people who once barely nodded to each other were now exchanging numbers, planning game nights, even talking about a neighborhood garden. You could feel it, something had shifted. Not just for the day, but for real. People weren't afraid anymore. They weren't avoiding eye contact. They weren't waiting for the next HOA email to tell them what they'd done wrong. They were showing up. By the time the last marshmallow had been roasted and the final lawn chair folded, folks were lingering. Nobody wanted to leave. Not because of the food or the music, but because of the feeling that had finally come back. Community. It wasn't built by forms or rules or property values. It started with a simple cookout. And a car that someone thought didn't belong. The next few days after the cookout, everything started to feel lighter. People waved more. There was actual eye contact at the mailbox. One of the older guys, Tom, who hadn't said more than 5 words to me in 3 years, strolled by one morning and handed me a folded lawn chair. "Thought you might need a spare for the next one," he said, and kept walking. And that was the thing. Nobody was asking if there would be a next one. They were already planning on it. I started getting messages through the community group page. People sharing pictures from the cookout. A dad posted a photo of his daughter with marshmallow on her face and captioned it, "This was the first time she stayed outside after sunset without asking to go home." Another neighbor tagged me in a photo of the grill and wrote, "Mr. Rolls-Royce got the whole block smiling again." It was strange and kind of funny. The very car that had triggered Karen into chaos had become a symbol of something better. Nobody was talking about luxury anymore. They were talking about togetherness. On Tuesday, I got a knock on the door. It was Dale, the head of the HOA board. Now Dale and I had never been particularly close. He was one of those clipboard guys, serious, stiff, always quoting bylaws like they were scripture. But this time, he wasn't holding anything. Just had a sheepish grin and 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He handed one to me and said, "Mind if I sit for a sec?" I shrugged and stepped aside. We sat on the porch, watching the breeze ripple across the pond behind the house. "I came by," he said slowly, "to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what? Ruining HOA order?" He chuckled. "Actually, for reminding us what the neighborhood's supposed to feel like." Turns out he'd heard from nearly every board member since the cookout. Not complaints. Not rule-breaking accusations. Just people asking how they could do more of that. More of the connection. More of the community. It shook him a little. He admitted that over time, the HOA had turned into something rigid and cold. Rules over relationships. Order over openness. And he didn't like what it had become. "You threw a burger on a grill," he said, "and lit a fire under all of us." We sat in silence for a moment before he added, "We're rewriting some of the neighborhood guidelines next quarter. We want to focus more on gatherings, shared spaces, maybe even community projects." I nodded. That's a good start. Then he leaned in and said something I didn't expect. "Karen's gone." I didn't say anything. She pulled her listing the day after the cookout. Packed up quietly. Moved out yesterday. Still, I stayed quiet. Dale sighed. Look, I'm not here to trash her. But the truth is, she had a grip on this place. Fear, tension, passive pressure. Everyone felt it. You standing your ground cracked that. I looked out at the driveway. The Rolls-Royce was parked under a shaded cover now. It wasn't the center of attention anymore. Just another car on the street. Funny how fast things change once people stop feeding the drama. Before Dale left, he said, "We'd like your help with the next event. Something family-friendly. Maybe a pond picnic?" I smiled. As long as I don't need to wear a name tag. He laughed, shook my hand and headed off. Later that afternoon, as I was putting away the porch chairs, I noticed something odd stuck in the slats of my fence. A small envelope. No name on the front, just taped shut. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper with one sentence written in small, neat handwriting. Asterisk, maybe I judged too fast. Hope you keep making this place better. That was it. No name. But I didn't need one. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer by my front door, next to a bunch of takeout menus and battery packs. Somewhere between useful and personal. A strange place for it, sure. But something about that fit. The sun dipped lower over the pond as the evening rolled in. I sat down on the porch swing and let the quiet settle around me. It wasn't the silence of tension anymore. It was the silence of peace. The next weekend, I found myself back out by the driveway, not with burgers this time, but with a tape measure and a sketch pad. I had an idea, something small but long overdue. I was planning to build a little seating area near the pond. Just a few benches and maybe a fire pit. Nothing fancy. Just a place for people to sit, talk, and be together without needing a reason. As I knelt down to mark a few measurements on the gravel, I heard a voice behind me. You building something else that'll make the whole neighborhood show up again? I turned to see James, one of the quieter neighbors. He usually kept to himself, always had earbuds in, barely said a word. Today, he had his dog with him and a shovel over his shoulder. I can dig, he said, without waiting for me to ask. You want help or not? I laughed and handed him a second measuring tape. I'll take all the help I can get. By noon, 3 other neighbors had joined in. One brought over leftover wood. Another dragged out a wheelbarrow. Someone set up a cooler filled with lemonade and water bottles. It was like the cookout all over again, but instead of burgers, it was bricks and teamwork. And still, nobody talked about Karen. Not in a gossipy way. Not even to gloat. It was like her hold on the place had vanished completely. A few months ago, this kind of group project would have required forms, approvals, at least 2 HOA meetings. Now, it was just happening. Naturally. Like it should have all along. While we worked, one of the teenagers asked if we could eventually add a small dock. Nothing big, he said, just a place to fish or sit with your feet in the water. Let's finish the benches first, I said, grinning. Then we'll see. That night, as I sat on one of the nearly finished benches, dirt still on my hands and sweat still on my back, I looked out at the pond and saw something I hadn't noticed before. People were using it. Not just walking by it. Actually using it. There were kids with fishing poles. A couple reading on a picnic blanket. 2 neighbors tossing a frisbee near the edge. Before, the pond was just scenery. A backdrop. Now it felt like part of the neighborhood's heartbeat. And then came the sound I didn't expect. A knock on my front door. I wiped my hands, made my way over, and opened it to find a man in a pressed suit, holding a clipboard. My stomach dropped for half a second. HOA? Code enforcement? Another Karen in disguise? He introduced himself politely. I'm from the county. Just doing a routine check. There were some past complaints about gatherings here. Thought I'd follow up. Of course. Karen's fingerprints lived on in paperwork, apparently. I invited him in, offered him some lemonade, and explained everything. The cookout. The community bench project. The false accusations. I even pulled up some messages from neighbors who had publicly supported it all. He listened, nodded, then said something that took me by surprise. Honestly, this is exactly what the county wishes more neighborhoods did. I blinked. You mean the bench? No, he said with a smile. The people. The way you all got together without waiting for permission to care. He jotted something down on his clipboard, closed it, and stood up. No violations here. Just the kind of thing I'd like to see more of. After he left, I sat on the porch again and watched the sunset pour orange light across the water. A few kids were skipping stones. A dog barked in the distance. 2 teens rode past on bikes, one yelling, "Nice work on the benches, man." And all I could think was how close I came to letting someone like Karen steal this peace. This connection. One angry woman, one phone call, and a neighborhood that had gone quiet for too long almost stayed that way. But here we were. Laughing, building, sharing again. And somehow, all of it had started with a car. A shiny, quiet Rolls-Royce. A symbol of something she hated. But the truth was, it was never about the car. Not really. One afternoon, as I was walking back from the mailbox, I noticed something sitting near the curb across the street. A small, dusty plastic container with a faded label on the lid. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it weren't sitting right in front of the one house that had recently gone quiet. Karen's old place. It had been empty for weeks now, the blinds closed, the lawn slowly overgrowing. Curiosity got the best of me. I walked over, looked around, then bent down and opened it. Inside were papers, a few old HOA newsletters, and, oddly, a stack of notes. Handwritten ones. Some were just scribbles on sticky pads, others on full sheets of paper. Most were complaints. Some so detailed it made me laugh out loud. Trash bins left out 3 minutes past pickup time, wind chimes too loud, and one that actually read, "Suspected unauthorized tomato growing in backyard garden." I closed the lid and sat on the curb with the box beside me. For a minute, I imagined what kind of energy it took to track these things. To wake up every morning and search for something, anything, wrong with the world around you. That's when Emily, a high school senior who lived 2 doors down, walked by. She stopped, saw the box, and smiled. "You found the complaint capsule, huh?" I laughed. "Is that what this is?" She nodded. "My little brother said he saw a guy cleaning out the garage a few days ago. Said he left that behind. Must have been Karen's personal file." She sat beside me. We used to think she was just bored. But now I think she was lonely. And angry. Not just at people but at life. I didn't say anything for a second. Then I nodded. "That tracks." Emily leaned back on her palms, looking at the house. "You know, we thought about TPing her yard the night after she left. As payback." "You didn't, right?" She laughed. "No. My mom stopped us. Said the best revenge is living well, and not turning into what you're fighting against." I like that. I nodded again. Smart mom. We sat for a while, talking about nothing and everything. She told me about college plans, how the cookout helped her reconnect with the neighborhood she always thought was boring. I told her about the pond seating plans and maybe putting up a community board near the mailboxes, a place for event flyers, local help, even birthday announcements. She loved the idea. As she stood up to head back, she said something I hadn't expected. "You know you're kind of like the unofficial mayor now, right?" I chuckled. "I just flipped some burgers." "Yeah, but you flipped the mood too." That stuck with me. Later that week, the pond area was finally finished. The benches were sanded smooth. A few flowers had been planted nearby. One neighbor brought in solar lights, and another painted a wooden sign that read, "Asterisk, gather here. No judgment allowed." Asterisk, it wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. Human. The first evening we lit the fire pit, it wasn't just about mores or stories. It was about everything that had changed, and everyone who helped make it happen. There were people who used to never speak now laughing shoulder to shoulder. Families that once rushed inside at the first sign of drama now lingering in lawn chairs, watching the flames dance over the pond. One man brought a guitar. He didn't even play well. But nobody cared. We all sang off-key and out of sync, but it didn't matter. Because it wasn't about music. It was about belonging. And as I looked around that firelight circle, I realized something important. This neighborhood used to live under a microscope, one person's opinion ruling over everyone else's freedom. People were cautious. Guarded. Scared of being called out or written up. But not anymore. Now, we were building something new, Not with rules or fences, but with eye contact, with potluck dishes, with neighbors looking out for each other instead of spying on one another. And all it took to start? One woman getting mad over a Rolls-Royce. And a community finally deciding they'd had enough.